Zhang He-jin, an assassin of the Heavenly Alliance, had stood before his enemies like an immovable rock amid chaos. Behind him, the army had roared with confidence, mistaking his calm for arrogance, blind to the strength he truly possessed. He had summoned them to attack, and they had hurled their spears directly at him, yet each enemy had fallen, as if fate had already sealed their doom. His sword had moved so swiftly that most didn't even realize they were dead until they hit the ground. Zhang had lost count of his victims. His mind had blurred, his consciousness merging with death itself. The real problem, he had thought, was the sheer number of enemies. They had continued to come, wave after wave. The air had grown thick with blood, but Zhang had killed without hesitation, without remorse. They had jeered, shouting predictions of his imminent death, but he had only laughed, asking mockingly if they truly wished for his end. After 30 years of searching, freedom was finally within reach, and he had no intention of backing down. He had vowed not to spare a single soul if it meant securing that freedom. His enemies had been warned of death, and every strike he delivered had turned that warning into reality. Only then had the commanders realized that he had to be stopped. Fear had taken hold of them as they began to grasp the truth. Their lives were vanishing beneath his blade. Zhang had deflected their attacks, leapt from their crossed swords like a springboard, and launched himself into the air. Clutching his weapon with renewed determination, he had resolved to fight to the end, whether it be his breath or theirs that ran out first. Rising like a flash of lightning, he had filled the battlefield with a surge of energy that split the air itself. Panic had spread as the enemy realized they were up against a master of terrifying power. They had called him the greatest killer, awed by his extraordinary agility. The king of assassins, they had whispered, Zhang He-jin, burning with fury and a desperate hunger for freedom. Like an avenger, he had descended from above, his strike hitting with such force that the earth had trembled as though struck by lightning. Where his enemies had once stood, there had been nothing left but a gaping crater, their bodies swallowed by the silence of death. "I'm so tired," he had muttered then, staring at the blood-stained sword that had claimed so many lives. Looking around the battlefield, he had allowed himself a moment to believe it was over, but the illusion had shattered with fresh screams. The fight was far from finished. His enemies had not stopped coming. Zhang had pulled his sword from the ground, its blade soaked in blood, and prepared for another charge. How much longer can this go on? He had wondered, feeling the weight of exhaustion and the dulling of his weapon, while the enemy's numbers only seemed to grow. Were they truly so desperate to keep me from freedom? Rage had surged through him again. His eyes had burned red as he roared his intent to destroy them all. With a sudden burst, he had scattered those before him, energy crackling in a yellow arc around his body. Drawing his sword once more, he had scoffed at their title for him. King. He had known better. He was no king, just a soulless dog of the Alliance. Then, with a final push, Zhang had launched himself into the sky like a bolt of lightning, his aura lighting up the battlefield, tearing through space as his fury exploded across the field once more. The enemies had begun to scream as the truth struck them. They were facing one of the 10 most powerful masters. In hushed terror, they had called him the greatest killer. "I'm so tired," he had whispered, his eyes fixed on the blood-drenched blade in his hand. For a moment, he had believed it was over, but the illusion of peace shattered instantly with a new wave of screams. The battle raged on. Without respite, his enemies had attacked again, forcing him to wrench his sword from the ground, still dripping with blood. Preparing for yet another clash, he had braced himself. How much longer can this continue? He had wondered, noting how his sword grew heavier and duller with each swing, while the enemy's numbers showed no signs of dwindling. Was their hatred for his freedom truly so relentless? But then, a sharp pain had shot through his body. His knees had buckled, and he had collapsed, barely able to remain upright. Yet it hadn't been just the wounds. Hunger clawed at him mercilessly. For an entire week, he had survived on only a few scraps of dried jerky. The starvation had become unbearable, turning him into something feral, a ravenous wolf in human form. Staring at the moon through blurred vision, a childish wish had surfaced in his mind. I wish I had some dumplings. But the moment had been short-lived. Against the backdrop of the moonlight, the silhouette of an enemy had appeared, rapidly closing the distance. The attacker had given no warning. His sword had been aimed directly at Zhang, who had narrowly evaded the strike. The force of the blow had split the stone beneath his feet. The enemy had moved with such precision that even Zhang had failed to sense his approach. After analyzing the technique, Zhang had quickly realized that he was facing a warrior of exceptional caliber. They had clashed in a brutal duel, Zhang barely managing to dodge the rapid, relentless strikes. Yet something about the enemy's style had struck him as familiar. Where have I seen these movements before? He had thought, eyes narrowing in concentration. Without pause, the enemy had unleashed another powerful swing, sending a wave of energy that cleaved through two trees in its path. The attacks had continued without mercy, forcing Zhang into constant retreat. Trees had fallen in his wake, scarred by the aura of the opponent's weapon, so potent that even its presence seemed capable of raising a forest. After enduring the relentless barrage, Zhang had landed squarely in front of his enemy, poised for another round. It was then that he had finally recognized the truth. He wasn't facing just another assassin. This was the most lethal killer in the entire South Central Valley, the so-called Lord of Death. In that instant, Zhang had understood why the Alliance had pursued him with such urgency. But even with all his knowledge and experience, he had never anticipated encountering the elites of the Steel Fortress. Zhang had looked at his opponent and asked if the man truly considered himself a master. Attacking after Zhang had already endured a grueling battle. Despite his exhaustion, he had declared that he still had enough strength left to defeat him. The enemy's confidence had wavered at those words. His eyes had widened, betraying his fear. Then, without hesitation, both warriors had launched into the air, energy crackling around them as their battle resumed in full force. Every movement, every strike, had been executed with such precision that it resembled a deadly dance, an art form perfected through countless battles. Zhang had moved with instinct, feeling his sword as an extension of his own body. He had landed a clean, decisive blow mid-air. The two combatants had landed softly moments later, the silence around them as sharp as the blade itself. Blood had trickled from beneath the enemy's mask, slowly streaking down his face. Zhang's sword had been soaked in it, the vivid red of death. The finality of it marked the end of their duel. Zhang had stood motionless, his blade lowered, watching his enemy collapse to the ground. Yet he hadn't relaxed. He knew it was not truly over. Closing his eyes, he had exhaled slowly, gathering strength for whatever might come next. Then he had spoken, his voice cutting through the silence. "Come out, if you've enjoyed the show enough." In response, a scarlet energy had begun to surge violently around him. The air grew thick with power, and Zhang had immediately realized what it meant. The Demon Queen had arrived. She had appeared before him in the form of a beautiful woman, smiling with deceptive warmth. "It's an honor to be part of your memories," she had said softly. "6 years has it been? It's been a long time," she had added, her voice tinged with nostalgia. The moonlight had bathed the scene in silver, casting eerie shadows between the boulders around them. The soft glow had fallen across the bodies of the fallen, enhancing the spectral atmosphere. Nearby, the first elder of the Celestial Alliance had arrived, his robes whispering against the grass as he examined the carnage with quiet awe. Servants had hurried forward, bowing low, as they reported that the dead belonged to the craftsmen of the Fortress of Steel Blood. The elder had silently taken it in, astonished that Zhang had managed to break through their traps and slaughter so many of their elite. With grim respect, he had acknowledged Zhang's infamous title, the King of Killers. Raising one hand, the elder had given a command. Instantly, the servants had prostrated themselves, showing their absolute loyalty. He had then ordered them to follow the traces of demonic energy left behind by the queen. Zhang He-jin had to be nearby. Queen Kwakso-gyo, despite being over 60, had appeared youthful, thanks to her forbidden techniques. But Zhang had known better. Her gentle appearance belied the madness lurking beneath the surface. She was ruthless, unhinged, and completely unpredictable. As if the masters of the fortress weren't enough, Zhang had thought bitterly, they had to send this madwoman after me too. Clenching his sword tighter, he had reminded himself that not all was lost. He still had one final card to play. But she had noticed his weapon, and had smirked. "A shame," she had said mockingly, "that someone I shared a special connection with is pointing a sword at me." Zhang had glared back, unmoved. "You can shove that special connection far away," he had snapped. "Now cut the nonsense." The woman had scoffed at Zhang's challenge, her tone mocking. She had replied coldly, calling him rude, and claiming she doubted whether he had the strength left to land even a single punch. Then, with feigned mercy, she had offered him an easier way out. But Zhang had refused the offer. He had declared that he would strike as many blows as he could, refusing to fear an old woman who, in his words, did nothing but wag her tongue. At the word old, her expression had twisted with fury. She had warned him through clenched teeth that if he said it again, she would show him his own spine. Unshaken, Jang had grinned and repeated the insult, calling her an old lady again, and not just once. He had mocked her age further, saying she had grown even more sensitive with the passing years. With every word, her rage had deepened, her face darkening like a storm about to break. But then, without warning, she had smiled, too sweetly. It was a dangerous smile, one that made Zhang instantly alert. Changing the topic, she had begun to speak of his reputation. She had said the Celestial Alliance had made him into the best assassin alive. Now, she claimed, it was clear why the Fortress of Steel Blood had sent her to face him. His core energy, she explained, was incredibly pure, clearly connected to the martial teachings of the 9 sects. She had accused him of mastering the forbidden martial art of the 9 sects, which, she said, explained how he had killed every one of their elite despite their attempts to capture him alive. Listening carefully, Jang had realized why she was stalling, why she hadn't yet attacked. She wasn't here just to fight. She was fishing for secrets. Jang had quickly understood her true motive. She wanted information about the 9 sects' martial arts and any weaknesses within the Celestial Alliance. She had likely assumed he was just a skilled warrior, nothing more. But his responses had shattered that assumption. He had countered her subtle interrogation with a question of his own, asking if she wasn't also curious about the secrets of the Fortress of Steel Blood. The woman, however, had dismissed the fortress and the alliance as unimportant. She had said that her only concern was the combat techniques of the 9 sects. If Jang revealed their secrets, she had promised to let him live. It had been a simple proposition, knowledge in exchange for survival, but Jang had laughed bitterly. He had replied with a mocking question of his own. Why was the Great Lakes region full of such useless fools? He had said that the deal was pointless anyway, as he was already standing at death's door. Her tone had turned sharp then. She had asked if his resignation stemmed from the parasite in his blood. That comment had triggered a visible reaction in Jang. She had gone on, calling him a punisher of traitors, nothing more than a tool of the so-called righteous heavenly alliance. The parasite in his body, she had explained, was a mechanism of control, designed to punish any act of betrayal, and his life or death, she had added, was entirely in the hands of the Alliance's ruler. He would never be free, so long as it remained within him. Then, almost seductively, she had offered him liberation. If he agreed to teach her the technique of the 9 sects, she claimed, she would destroy the parasite herself. With her mastery of the god of death's arts and her knowledge of poisons, she insisted she could free him. In return, all she wanted was the knowledge locked inside him. Jang had lowered his head, silent, the weight of her offer settling over him like a mountain. He gripped his sword tighter, a flicker of hesitation passing across his face. He had stood there, quiet and unmoving, thinking. Was this the freedom he had longed for? All it required was betrayal, giving up the sacred teachings of the 9 sects. And then, breaking the silence, he had laughed. "Did you really think," he had asked her, voice edged with defiance, "that the Alliance is hunting me just because I ran away?" Zhang's words had taken the Demon Queen by surprise. He had revealed that, as one of the 10 strongest masters, he had known for a long time how to remove the parasite within him. The only thing he had lacked was the strength to overcome the Alliance's traps. It had taken him years of training, but now, standing on the brink of his goal, he had made it clear. He was almost free. When the Demon Queen had offered to let him live in exchange for knowledge, Jang had rejected the proposal without hesitation. He had told her plainly that her words meant nothing to him. He had spent 30 years among liars, schemers, and murderers. He would not be deceived again. He had raised his voice and shouted for her to step aside, calling her a brute and warning that if she left now, she might still save her miserable life. She had scoffed at the threat, unable to comprehend how a man who could barely stand had the audacity to speak to her that way. But she, too, had her pride, and she would not allow herself to be humiliated. Looking into her eyes, Jang had seen the realization dawn. She had finally understood. He would never teach her the secrets she sought. He, in turn, had seen in her gaze the truth he already knew. She would never let him leave alive. And at last, the Demon Queen Kwakso had dropped her facade. Screaming in fury, she had shouted for him to die, calling him a useless bastard. Zhang, filled with unyielding rage, had screamed back, cursing her as a damned old woman. In that moment, a blinding surge of pure energy had erupted from Zhang's chest, radiating outward in a wave that formed a dome-like aura around him. The shockwave had collided with her dark power in a thunderous explosion. The ground quaked beneath them. Trees had been ripped apart and hurled through the air like twigs in a storm. And still, both warriors stood. Their swords crackled with violent destructive energy. Kwok had extended her clawed hands, energy surging through each talon. With a slash, she had torn through Zhang's arm. The pain had been instant and excruciating, sending electric agony through his nerves like needles piercing his entire body. And then, without warning, the first elder had appeared. Zhang hadn't even sensed him until it was too late. How long has he been watching? He had wondered in a flash of dread. The elder's sword moved like lightning, swift and absolute. In a blink, Zhang's legs were severed from his body. Then came his arms, spinning through the air in bloody arcs. The pain was beyond endurance. Zhang had screamed, every fiber of his being consumed by torment. The demon queen and the first elder had moved together like a single, merciless force. There was no room for hope. No miracle would save him. Blood poured from his mouth. His body was covered in wounds, now a broken shell. Limbless, he had collapsed onto his knees, unable to remain upright any longer. The demon queen had approached, a sneer on her face, and taken his head in her hands. She had mocked him cruelly, saying he looked even better without his limbs. Then, as if his head were just another nuisance, she had coldly decided she no longer wanted to hear his voice, and made sure he would never speak again. After wishing him a safe journey to the next world, the demon queen had smiled with twisted joy. Her expression radiated the glee of a 17-year-old girl reveling in her first kill. For her, murder had always been a blessing, not a burden. Was this truly the final moment of Zhang's life? In the haze of pain and fading consciousness, he had dreamed, not of glory or revenge, but of simplicity. For just a moment, he had longed to live as an ordinary man. Was that really too much to ask? He had wondered, what if there was a second chance? That thought had been his last. Far away, in the main sanctuary of the divine cult of the heavenly demon, a young man lay unconscious upon a bed, his body still and pale. Morning light streamed through tall windows, falling softly across his youthful frame and long dark hair. Deep within him, as if echoing from a forgotten past, a thought stirred. If I had a second chance. His eyes snapped open. Smoke coiled from a long tobacco pipe, drifting lazily into the air. Nit sat nearby, listening intently to a man who spoke with quiet authority. The man, calm, composed, and sharp-eyed, was the fourth young master of the divine cult. He stated firmly that the divine teachings were absolute, and that in time, this is the end of the part 1. If you liked it and want to see more, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and write a comment of at least 4 words. Thanks for watching. Bye.